A son thrown his mother out of the house for his wife. Jesus taught him this lesson. There are moments in life that just break you in half. They make you question every decision, every little step you've taken. And look, I thought I'd seen it all. In my line of work, I've sat with presidents, rock stars, even once, with a guy who swore his dog could predict the stock market. But none of that prepared me for the story of Robert, absolutely nothing. Robert, a 37-year-old man, with a smile that could light up a room and the bank account of a guy who had, let's say, made it big. Engineer software, a new house in the suburbs, a luxury car. He had it all. Everything, except one thing, the perspective. What he told me? Well, I'll just say this. The week before Christmas last year, Robert kicked his own mother out of his house. Oh, not in a mom dinner's ready kind of way. No, throw her out. And look, that's the part of the story everyone knows, or thinks they know. But the real story, the one that keeps me up at night, is what happened after. Because believe me, the lesson Robert received didn't come from me, or a judge, or even his wife. It came from someone who doesn't expect anyone to believe, a carpenter named Jesus. But don't get ahead of yourself. The blow came long before the lesson. To understand why a son would do something like that, we have to rewind about 5 years. Back then, Robert was on top. Not just for money, but for love. He met Sarah. Sarah was 34 years old. She worked in graphic design, with a free spirit and an ambition that matched Robert's perfectly. They married a year later. A beautiful wedding, in a sunny garden. But before Sarah, there was Evelyn. Robert's mother, Evelyn, a 68-year-old woman, with hands that smelled of lavender soap and a stack of old-school stories. Evelyn had been a widow for over 20 years. Her financial situation was, frankly, tight. She lived on a modest pension, in a small apartment that required too many repairs for her to afford. Robert, the good son that he was, at least at first, decided that this couldn't go on. So Robert and Sarah, newlyweds, invited Evelyn to live with them in their spacious new home. It was a beautiful house, with 4 bedrooms and a well-kept garden. Robert thought it was the perfect solution. Mom will be comfortable and safe, told me. And you only have to pay a little bit for the services, so you feel independent. Evelyn, of course, was ecstatic. She thought, my son is saving me. And at first, it was truly idyllic. Imagine, Robert went out to work, Sarah worked from home in her studio, and Evelyn cooked. The house always smelled of cornbread and freshly brewed coffee. There was laughter, there was peace. The plan was simple, family peace, but as is often the case with plans, life had a way of screwing things up. The first year passed without a hitch. Evelyn did the laundry, helped in the garden, never intruded. But as the months passed, the little things started to pile up. Sarah, who was very particular about her space and routines, started to get irritated. It wasn't anything big, not at first. It was the volume on Evelyn's television, which was a bit high. It was Evelyn insisting on using her own brand of dish soap, which Sarah didn't like. It was the coffee cups left in the sink. Little things, right? Things you ignore with a stranger, but which can drive you crazy when it's your husband's mother. What I noticed, and what Robert couldn't see, is that Robert's house had ceased to be his newlywed's paradise and was becoming his mother-in-law's territory. The tension became palpable around Robert and Sarah's second anniversary. Sarah stopped eating lunch in the kitchen and shut herself away in her study. Family meals became tense. The silence between them was louder than any argument.
And
Robert was caught in the middle. He earned almost $200,000 a year, but he felt poorer than ever because he was paying a huge emotional price. One day, Sarah waited for him in the garage as soon as he came home from work. Her usually bright eyes were cloudy. Robert, he told me, she doesn't let me breathe. The real complaint was that Evelyn was unwittingly taking control of the house. She rearranged the pantry shelves. She changed the living room curtains without asking. Robert tried to calm the waters. He bought Sarah flowers. He told Evelyn to leave the curtains alone. Temporary solutions to a deep-seated problem. The reality was that their marriage was falling apart, not because of infidelity, but because of a silent conflict over the territory. Things reached a turning point. Evelyn had saved some money and decided to give Robert an expensive antique leather chair that had belonged to Robert's father. It was a gesture of love, a piece of history. The problem was that the chair did not fit the modern and minimalist style that Sarah had spent months designing. Robert, sensing the tension in the air, tried to store it in the attic. But Evelyn saw through it. She felt rejected, hurt. "Your father sat there reading the Bible," she said to Robert, her voice breaking. That night, Sarah gave Robert an ultimatum. A cold, logical ultimatum, almost like a presentation of PowerPoint about why 3 adults could not live together. "Robert, you have to choose. It's her or me." And that's the moment Robert can never get back. The line he crossed, the choice that not only broke his mother's heart, but also broke something inside him he didn't know was there. What did he do? You'll see later. The days that followed that ultimatum were, as Robert described them to me, the thickest air I'd ever breathed. Imagine the scene: Thanksgiving dinner without a turkey, a silence so heavy you could almost touch it. Robert and Sarah barely looked at each other, and poor Evelyn felt the storm approaching. Evelyn wasn't stupid. I knew Sarah wasn't happy. She tried to be the perfect mother-in-law, retreating to her room, only coming out to go to church or for a walk. But the problem wasn't what she was doing anymore, it was that she was there. Sarah wanted her home, her marriage, back. And Robert, the boy who in his youth had defended his mother from the neighborhood bullies, suddenly found himself more afraid of losing his wife than of breaking his mother's heart. The final conversation wasn't a heated argument. It was worse. It was business. One afternoon, early December, Robert waited until Sarah was out to have the talk with Evelyn. He didn't want any witnesses. He sat opposite her while she knitted a shawl on the living room sofa, the one Sarah had chosen, of course. Robert, in his engineering voice, software, tried to be rational. "Mother," began, "this isn't working. Stress is killing my marriage." Evelyn dropped her knitting needles. The sound they made as they fell onto the wooden floor echoed throughout the house. She had the face of someone who had just been slapped, and not with the hand, but with the future. Robert explained that he had already found a solution. He had paid him 3 months' rent in Asmal apartment about 20 miles away. He told her he would give her extra money for the move and that he would visit her every Sunday. He introduced him as a gift, an improvement for her life, because that way she could have your own space. But the truth, the harsh truth, was that he wasted spelling. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't cry immediately. She simply looked at him with those 68-year-old eyes, full of history, and asked, "Are you kicking me out, Robert?" Robert, unable to look her in the eye, just murmured, "It's the best thing for everyone, Mom. It's temporary." But they both knew that the word temporary was the biggest lie Robert had ever told. 10 years. The move happened 3 days later. The day Robert described to me as the coldest and most shameful of his life. Evelyn packed his things in 3 cardboard boxes. 3 boxes for 68 years off life. Most of her belongings were in Robert's house, but they weren't hers. She only took her clothes, old photos of her husband, and, most painfully, her late husband's leather chair that Robert had forbidden him to put in the living room. Robert hired a couple of guys to do the job quickly. He stayed in the garage, pretending to clean his car, while his mother, the woman who gave him life and held his hand in the darkness, left. When Evelyn got into the rental car, wrapped in her oldest coat, she approached the garage window where Robert was hiding. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't curse him. She simply said one thing, a short sentence that hit him harder than any scream. "When you take away the soil from a tree that gave you shade, pray that the new soil will accept it." And then he was gone. Robert, with his engineer's salary and his 4-bedroom house, he was left alone, feeling the emptiness of his mother's absence like a black hole. The immediate aftermath was exactly what Robert had hoped and hoped for: peace. Sarah was radiant. She redecorated Evelyn's guest room almost immediately, turning it into a yoga office. They started hanging out more, dining at fancy restaurants, talking about having children. Robert's marriage had been brand. Sarah even said, "Thank you, honey, for putting our marriage first." Robert felt like a hero. He had made a difficult decision, but he had made it wisely. Love, he felt justified. He felt freed from the constant tension. But freedom comes at a price. The price came in the form of silence. Robert confessed to me that every time he opened the refrigerator, he expected it to smell like cornbread. Every time he heard a car coming up the driveway, he expected to see his mother's old sedan. The house was clean, elegant, organized, and cold, so cold that Robert started lighting the fireplace even when he didn't need to, just to feel a little warmth. And the worst part, he started dreaming. He dreamed of his father sitting in that leather chair, reading. He dreamed of Evelyn holding his hand after he fell off his bike when he was 7 years. Robert visited Evelyn on the first Sunday. The small apartment he had rented for her was functional, clean, but soulless. It was empty. Evelyn was fine, quiet. Too quiet. They talked about the weather, about church. Robert offered to fix a leaky faucet. Evelyn looked at him, not with resentment, but with a distance that scared him. Before leaving, he offered her an extra $100 for groceries. Evelyn didn't take it. "Thank you, Robert," he said in a flat voice, "but I don't need handouts. Your father taught me to be sufficient with what God gave me." That phrase, that reminder from his father, struck Robert with the force of a lightning bolt. He walked away with the $100 bill in his pocket, feeling like the smallest person in the world. Weeks passed. Robert continued to visit his mother, but the visits were empty rituals. He was there physically, but not spiritually. Meanwhile, at home, Robert and Sarah were preparing for Christmas. It was mid-December. They bought a huge, expensive tree. They had a dinner party planned with their friends. Everything was perfect on the surface. But as the December 20, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing. He was missing the heart from his own house, which he had taken 20 miles away, and that Christmas was going to bring him an unexpected visitor. One that wasn't on his guest list, or even his friends list. A visitor that would make him question every decision he'd ever made. It all started with a noise, a sound Robert couldn't identify. He was in his office, working on a spreadsheet about his net worth, feeling quite proud. He heard a knock on the front door, lose. His wife Sarah was out Christmas shopping. Robert got up from his desk $3,000 and walked toward the door, frowning. "A delivery man? A neighbor?" What I was about to see was nothing of the sort. It was the first piece of a puzzle that Jesus the Carpenter had left on the porch of his brand new home. Robert opened the door. And there he was. Not a delivery man with an Amazon Prime package. Not a neighbor asking for sugar. It was a man. A man who seemed out of place in that tidy residential area. He was standing on the welcome mat off $50, wearing a pair of worn work boots and a plaid flannel that had seen better days. In his hands, he wasn't carrying a shopping list or a smartphone. He was carrying an old wooden toolbox, stained with paint and with the handle worn from use. It looked like it had come out of a movie 1950. This man, about 50-something years old, with a neatly trimmed graying beard, introduced himself with a smile that was surprisingly warm, almost familiar. "Hello," he said, and his voice was soft and deep. "My name is Jesus. Or, if you prefer, JC. Robert, the engineer off software who only interacted with people with advanced college degrees, was confused. "Jesus," asked Robert, "are you looking for someone? I don't remember asking for any carpentry services." Robert looked past Jesus, toward the driveway, expecting to see a work truck or a ladder. There was nothing but Robert's luxury car. The man, JC, laughed softly. It was an honest laugh, one that came from his stomach. "No, you didn't call me Robert," he said, using his first name as if they were old friends. Robert cringed. "But someone who lives here called me. He told me there was a part of the house that urgently needed repair. An important part that had recently broken." Robert went blank. He'd checked the insulation, the pipes, the air conditioning system. As an engineer, he was meticulous. "Look, my house is practically new. Nothing's broken, I assure you." Robert felt that chill you get when you think you're being sold something you don't need. Jesus, or JC, put his toolbox on the floor. The dull sound of metal against wood seemed too loud in the suburban silence. He leaned slightly toward Robert and lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "What about your heart, Robert? Is it broken?" The comment was so direct, so out of character, that Robert felt his face redden. He felt exposed. How on earth could this stranger, a carpenter by chance, that Robert had been sleeping badly since he kicked his mother out? "Look, sir," said Robert, trying to regain control, "if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. I need you to leave." But JC didn't move. He simply pointed his thumb at the large wooden box. "I have the right material. It won't cost you a cent, not until you're convinced the repair works." He paused, and his expression became serious, almost sad. "Your mother called me, Robert. Not with words, but with a silence. She told me that the foundation of your house, what makes it home, if it is falling apart." Robert felt dizzy. His mother, Evelyn. He didn't have the number of her new apartment. How could he have called him? Before Robert could protest again, Jesus interrupted him, as if he knew exactly what Robert was going to say. "I know you're busy, Robert. I see your cars. I see your house. You're successful. But success is not the same as wealth, and wealth is not the same as peace." JC bent down and picked up a small piece of wood from the ground. It was smooth, worn. "I'm going to show you something." He headed to the side of the house, toward the well-kept garden. Robert, paralyzed by a mixture of confusion and curiosity, reluctantly followed him. JC stopped by the wall, right where Robert had installed an expensive ornamental water fountain. He nudged the fountain slightly. Robert was indignant. "Hey, be careful with that." But Jesus ignored him. He pointed to a small hole in the brick, right at the ground line. "Do you see this, Robert? This is where the foundation meets the ground. It's the part that bears all the weight, the one no one sees, the one that's supposed to be solid and stable. But if the ground isn't firm, the house, no matter how beautiful the fountain, will start to lean." Then JC straightened and looked at Robert with an intensity that pierced his designer glasses. "Your mother is your foundation, Robert. And you've uprooted her. You've destabilized the basis of your own life for a new decoration." There it was. The blow. The use of the word rootless, exactly how Evelyn had felt. Robert felt a lump in his throat. He tried to argue about Sarah, about the stress, about the money. "You don't understand the situation. My wife was unhappy. I was saving my marriage." Jesus nodded slowly, but not approvingly. "I understand more than you know, Robert. I understand marriage. I understand choices. But let me ask you something. If your wife asked you to turn off the oxygen so she could breathe fresher air, would you do it? Your mother gave you life, the foundation of who you are. And your wife's fear of loneliness, a fear you created with your silence, made you sacrifice the only person who has loved you unconditionally from the day you were born in 1886. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't tense. It wasn't fool. Robert stood there, by the fountain point $300, feeling like the child off 7 years who had just lied to his father. JC wiped his hands on his work pants and picked up the toolbox. "I'm just passing through. But the repair starts now. I'm going to give you a little job to do. They call it the carpenter's job. If you do it right, if you use the right tools you already have, maybe you can fix the foundation before it's too late." Robert, completely unarmed, could only whisper, "What should I do?" And JC's answer was so simple, yet so impossible, that Robert felt like laughing and crying at the same time. Robert stood there in his own garden, feeling like he had failed an exam he didn't even know he had to take. "What should I do?" he asked again, his voice just a whisper. And Jesus, the man with the flannel and the old toolbox, came over, putting a large, calloused hand on Robert's shoulder. It wasn't a condescending touch, it was a touch off-breath, of connection. "The carpenter's work is simple," JC said, looking Robert in the eye. "You have to build a bridge, Robert. Not out of wood, but out of modesty." Robert frowned. It sounded like cheap philosophy, not something a software cow'd be fixed with a spreadsheet. But JC kept talking, and the meaning, the stark reality, began to sink in. "Your mother gave you a piece of family history, a seat that meant belonging. And you rejected it," Jesus explained, referring to Robert's father's leather chair. "The first tool is the repentance." Robert felt uncomfortable. "But what does a chair have to do with fixing my life?" JC smiled, that deep, calm smile. "You don't repair the foundation with cement. You repair it with roots. What you have to do, Robert, before Christmas, is to go to your mother and ask him to return that leather chair to you that he took. And not only that, you have to dismantle water source off $300 that you have here and prepareth place. The chair should be the first thing people see when they enter your living room, as if you were saying, 'This is my home, this is my story, this is my base.'" Robert's breath left him. The terror of that gesture, The humiliation was almost unbearable. My wife will kill me. She spent thousands designing that room. That chair doesn't fit. It's what caused the problem in the first place. Robert was yelling now, the frustration of the last few weeks exploding. Jesus remained unperturbed. The chair didn't cause the problem, Robert. Your fear caused the problem. Fear of losing something that can be replaced, Sarah, rather than fear of losing something that can't be replaced, your mother. He bent down, picked up his toolbox. If you can't honor the roots of your home, how do you expect your marriage to take root? The second tool is the value. Do this before I get back, Robert. And only then can we talk about the second lesson. And with that, no truck, no car, Jesus turned and walked away down the street, out of sight so fast that Robert wondered if it had all been a fever dream. Robert, the successful engineer off 37 years with a huge mortgage, he was stunned. He walked into the house, looking for JC, looking for a business card, proof that he was real. There was nothing. Just the heavy silence and the image of that old chair in his mind. It was the 20th of December. I had to do it in less than 5 days. The confrontation with Sarah was instantaneous. Robert went to get the tools. Sarah, who had just come home from the store with a bundle of expensive gifts in her arms, stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes narrowed. Robert, what are you doing with that wrench? Don't even think about touching the fountain, she asked, in a tone of voice that Robert had only heard when she was dealing with an incorrect invoice. Robert, feeling strange and at the same time strangely brave, told him half the truth. He omitted JC. I'm going to take the fountain away, Sarah. And I'm going to bring my dad's chair from Mom's house. It's going to go here. It's important. Sarah laughed. A cold, sharp laugh. Are you kidding? That ugly, worn-out thing? Robert, it'll ruin everything. We spent $10,000 redecorating. That chair is what almost broke us up. What's wrong with you? He didn't give in. Something had broken inside Robert, but something else, something stronger, was taking its place. There's no negotiating, Sarah. The source goes away. And the chair comes. It's not just a piece of furniture. It's the foundation. He used JC's word. The fight that followed was not about the chair itself. It was about the control and about Ethanorth that Robert was about to restore. Sarah saw the act as Evelyn's return, as a threat to her authority in the house. The scene culminated with Robert clumsily dismantling the elegant ornamental water fountain with a wrench. Sarah stormed off to bed, announcing that she would be sleeping in the study. Robert was left alone, in his perfectly designed living room, next to the hole in the ground where the fountain had once stood. It was an empty, expectant space. He sat down on the floor, next to the gap. And for the first time in months, he felt a dress, but the next step was the most difficult. Go to his mother, the woman he had rejected, and ask her to give him something again. I had to rebuild that bridge before December 25th arrived. It was the morning of December 21st. The air was so cold it hurt his nose to breathe. Robert, despite his centrally heated home, felt a chill coming from within. Sarah was still fuming. She had slept in the yoga studio, and when Robert tried to speak, she simply said, "Don't talk to me about that chair, Robert. Not until you promise it'll never come through that door again." The irony of Christmas. Robert realized that the only thing he'd recently given was a broken heart, and the only thing he was about to receive was, probably, the door in his face. He got into his car, that expensive, fast German car, and drove the 20 Molesto, his mother's small, soulless apartment. The drive felt like an eternity. As he drove, Robert realized something horrible. I hadn't thought about that. He found it difficult to throw it away, nor in the difficult hat it was now necessary for him to ask for something. He had paid the rent as if he were paying off a debt, but he had never truly regretted the decision. He arrived at the apartment complex. It was a clean, functional, but so anonymous place. He rang the doorbell. He waited. He heard a couple of slow footsteps inside, and then the door opened a crack, chained shut. Evelyn, her mother, was there. She was wearing her old wool robe, and her eyes looked tired, but not sad. They were empty of expectation. She just looked at him. "Hi, Robert. I wasn't expecting you until Sunday," he said. His voice was flat, without that spark of 68 years that I used to have. Robert felt a pang of physical pain. He felt deeply ashamed. "Mom, can I come in?" Evelyn unhooked the chain, but didn't step aside. Robert entered. The apartment smelled clean, but not homey. It smelled like rental property. In the corner, wrapped in a blanket to protect it from the weather and damage, was his father's leather chair. Robert stared at her. It was like looking at an old map of a land he'd forgotten. She had protected him. "What's up, Robert? Do you need the extra money I offered you last week?" Evelyn sat on the sofa, far from the chair. Robert stood in the center of the small living room. He felt he had to stand there and endure the humiliation. "No, Mom. It's about the chair," he said, his voice breaking. There it was. The bridge of humility. Robert took a deep breath and looked at his mother. "Mom, I know this sounds crazy, and I wouldn't blame you if you kicked me out right now. But I need her back. To let me take her." Evelyn's face twisted slightly. The trace of the deep wound. "What for, Robert? So you can sell it? Or so you can hide it in the garage again?" Robert approached. No. I want it in the living room, Mom. In the middle, where the water fountain was. I've removed it." He took a risk. "I want the first thing anyone sees when they enter my house to beta base off my life." "Dad." He said it out loud. He was asking for a piece of his pain and his history back. Evelyn stood slowly. She walked toward Robert, and he flinched, waiting for a scream. She just stared at him. And then she saw tears, the first she'd seen in his eyes in a long time. "And what about Sarah, Robert? Does she know? Did she force you to do this?" Robert swallowed. Sarah's furious. She said I was going to ruin the design. She said I'd gone mad. But I'm doing it anyway, Mom. Not for her, and not because a stranger told me to. I'm doing it because I realized that when I kicked you out of the house, I didn't just take your room. I stole your connection to Dad, and I took the heart of my own house. The words rang true, and Robert felt a little lighter. He had spoken the truth. Evelyn went to the chair. She ran her hand over the worn leather. "Your father said that money will never set you free, Robert. It will only make you heavier." She sighed. "You can take it, Robert. It was always yours. But if you put it in your living room, you must do more than honor the man who sat in it. You have to honor the connection that represents. And Robert," she walked over to him, and this time she hugged him. A brief hug, but one filled with the scent of lavender and cornbread that Robert had desperately missed. Robert left with the chair wrapped in his trunk. The feeling was strange. He had been humiliated, he had faced the truth, but now he had the chair. And he had gotten a hug. The bridge of humility was built, even if it was only a wobbly walkway. When he returned to his elegant home, he laboriously dragged the chair into the living room. He placed it in its place of honor, in the gap left by the fountain. Tea was grotesque. It didn't fit, but it felt real. And just as I was dusting the chair, the doorbell rang again. Lose. Robert opened the door. There he was, the man in the flannel and the toolbox. JC was back. "I see you fixed the first part of the foundation," said Jesus, with a glance toward the chair. "But a bridge without traffic is just a decorative piece, don't you think? The second part of the lesson is harder. It's about the service." Robert felt a chill. If the first part was difficult, what could be worse than facing his mother and wife? He was about to find out, and the carpenter wasn't going to be gentle. Robert, his father's leather chair gleaming in the light in his living room, looked at JC. The carpenter eye felt a mixture of relief at having completed the first task and terror at what came next. "Service?" asked Robert, the engineer who was used to hiring people to do anything that didn't require a computer. "Do you need me to repair a neighbor's porch? I can pay someone to do it." JC laughed again, that soft laugh that sounded like the scraping of fine sandpaper. "The service you need, Robert, is not paid for with money. It is paid for with time. And with pain." JC walked over and jerked his thumb toward the leather chair. "That chair is a beautiful piece of history, Robert. But do you know why your father treasured it so much? Because he didn't buy it. Ethos." Robert froze. He had never known. His father had been a hard-working man, But Robert, as a child in the 1990s, I had always assumed it was an old, expensive piece of furniture. Did he make it? JC nodded. With your hands. Piece by piece. He always said that things that are built with effort, with sweat, last. The things that are they break easily. Here is your next task, JC continued, speaking in a low voice so that Sarah, who was in the study, couldn't hear. Your mother gave you a home. Your wife wants a home. And you have tried to buy peace with money and getting rid of people. The only way to have a home is build it. JC opened his wooden toolbox. Inside weren't high-tech power tools, but rather very antique-looking chisels, hammers, and gouges. JC pulled out an unfinished piece of wood. It was thick, shapeless. I need you to make a decision, Robert. What did you give your mother to get her kicked out? A soulless apartment, right? I want you to go to her tiny apartment and, with your bare hands, with hand tools, build a table for their kitchen. Build it yourself, piece by piece, without anyone else touching the wood. You'll have to bring your own wood, work in the garden or their tiny backyard, and do it before Christmas. Robert's jaw dropped. But Jesus, I've never built anything like that. I'm an engineer, I code. I don't even know how to use half of those tools. Robert, who earned $200,000 a year, felt pathetic at the simple concept of building a table. JC placed a hammer in Robert's hand. The weight felt strange. Exactly, Robert. You've never served. Has paid the goal of this service isn't the table. The goal is for your hands, the hands that signed the rent check to evict her, to feel the work, the connection with the material, the dedication it takes to build something that lasts. It's the only way you'll understand the value of what your mother gave you. Robert looked at the hammer. And then he looked at his father's leather chair. He felt the weight of the value. Okay, whisper. Where do I get the wood? JC told him to look for a simple wood, not the most expensive, but the most strong. That I would go to the local store and talk to the owner and ask questions that I will not pay to avoid the work of learning. JC looked at him one last time before gathering his tools. One more thing, Robert. Don't tell your mother what you're doing. This isn't a gift. It's maintenance. And Robert, JC paused, looking at the closed door to Sarah's study. When your wife asks you where you're going or what you're doing, tell her the truth. You can't build a bridge to your mother if your wife thinks you're building a wall against her. And so, JC left, leaving Robert alone with a hammer and a monumental task. Robert called a hardware store. It was December 21st, 2 days before Christmas Eve. I had 2 days to learn basic carpentry, buy wood, and build a functional table. Robert, the man who once thought his biggest challenge was debugging code, 50,000 lines, was about to discover that his real challenge was a piece of wood and a handful of nails. The service, the real service, was about to begin. December 21, Robert was out of his element. His office was bright and air-conditioned, and his work was done with a keyboard. Now he was in the lumberyard, smelling of sawdust and damp, his hands full of splinters. He approached the man who was waiting, a sturdy, silent fellow named Mike. Robert, the engineer off software, tried to speak in terms of specs. I need wood for a four-legged frame and a flat surface. Something stress-resistant. Mike, who had been chopping wood since 1980, crossed his arms. He looked at Robert's clothes. For a kitchen table? Mike asked, unimpressed. Robert nodded, feeling tiny. Yes. For my mother. It's a Christmas present. Mike narrowed his eyes. Fine. Do you want me to cut it off and hand it to you, or do you want me to show you how it's done? Does. Robert remembered JC's words, don't pay to avoid the work of learning. I want you to show me, said Robert, and it sounded surprised even to him. He spent the morning learning how to differentiate between oak and pine, how to measure for perfect joints, and, most painfully, how to use a handsaw. His hands, more accustomed to thermocephalum a computer, soon became blistered. Robert was spent $120 made of pine wood and a few nails. It was the most humble material he could find, but Mike assured him it was strong. When Robert returned home, he had to face Sarah. She was sitting on the couch, using her laptop, with the expression of someone who had lost her temper a long time ago. He dragged the pine boards from the garage, straight to his spacious and well-maintained backyard, which was only used for elegant barbecues. Sarah came out, carrying a steaming cup of coffee, and saw Robert's old tools, JC's hammer, and the rough wood. "What's all this, Robert?" His voice was low, dangerous. "It looks like you're building a hut. What are you going to do now, put chickens?" Robert took a deep breath. He remembered JC's advice. Honesty. "I'm going to build a table for Mom, Sarah. A kitchen table. With my own hands. The man who gave me the chair said that a foundation isn't repaired with money, but with work. With service." He deliberately omitted Jesus' name, not wanting to make Sarah think he had suddenly become religious. Sarah dropped her coffee cup on the grass. Luckily, it was empty. "You're ruining my house. First the disgusting chair, now a boatyard in the backyard, and all to do your mom a favor, after you've already paid her rent and kept her away from us." The truth was that Sarah didn't understand the word service for her. If it didn't produce a profit, it was a waste of time. Robert felt the sting of injustice. "It's not a favor, Sarah. It's a penance. And I'm not keeping her away. I kicked her out. And I'm trying to fix it. This isn't about you. It's about me and the lack of honor I've shown my own family." The use of the word honor made Sarah retreat slightly. This was the first time Robert hadn't tried to calm or buy her off. He was standing up to her over something she considered insignificant. Sarah entered the house, closing the sliding glass door with a resounding bang. Robert stood alone in the cold, staring at the wooden planks. He sat on the floor, put on work gloves to protect his blisters, and began measuring and cutting. The first joints were horrible, crooked. The saw kept slipping. He had to remeasure, recut. Every blow of the hammer, every splinter, was a small lesson in humility and a way to purge his guilt. Night fell. Robert hadn't eaten. He was exhausted. The table was just a clumsy skeleton. But for the first time in years, Robert wasn't thinking about the stock market or bank deadlines, that software. He was thinking about his father, sitting in that chair, creating something with his hands. He was thinking about his mother, who had spent her entire life serving her family with simple acts. Meals, laundry, a shoulder to cry on. Robert was feeling the value of manual labor. At midnight, Robert crawled into bed. Sarah was facing away from him, pretending to be asleep. He didn't try to touch her. He just lay there, smelling of sawdust and feeling the pain in his hands. But there was more to it than pain. A strange feeling of satisfaction. "I knew the table was horrible, but it washed the water, and the next day, the December 22nd, I would have to continue. I had to finish it and hand it in." And Christmas Eve was approaching. December 22 ND. The day started early for Robert. His hands were burning, his shoulders were tense. But there was a motivation in him that money couldn't buy. He put on his oldest clothes, the same clothes he would have thrown away a long time ago, 5 years, and went back to the backyard. That table had to be finished. Not only did it have to be functional, it had to be a symbol of their repentance. Sarah went out at noon, dressed in elegant clothes for last-minute shopping. She avoided the backyard, but saw her through the window. Robert, the engineer software with hundreds of thousands of dollars on the bench, he was lying on the floor, sanding the pine legs with a piece of sandpaper, sweating and cursing under his breath. The sight was so ridiculous, so out of place, that Sarah couldn't hide her sneer. He opened the sliding door. "Robert, really? Have you looked at yourself? You look like a bum. What are you going to say to people when they come around for Christmas Eve dinner and see this? Not to mention the what in the room." She couldn't even say chair. Robert straightened. His eyes weren't the tired eyes of a businessman, but the focused eyes of a worker. "I'll tell you the truth, Sarah," said Robert in a firm voice. "This is the table I made for my mother, and the chair is my father's. If you don't like it," shrugged, "you can go home." Robert noticed that Sarah didn't yell back. She was confused by the calm authority that came from him. He wasn't reacting to his anger. He was acting from a conviction. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "You're acting like this guy brainwashed you." "Who is this Carpenter?" Robert stopped. "It's just someone who showed me that I had confused the comfort with the connection. And honestly, Sarah, I'm not sure this marriage is worth it if I have to keep sacrificing my honor for your decoration." It was a bombshell. The first time Robert set real boundaries. Sarah withdrew, her face pale, and left without saying goodbye. Robert continued working, feeling like he had crossed a threshold. By afternoon, the pine table was finally finished. It was rough, yes. It was a little crooked, yes. But it washed the water he had learned about tenon joints, driven each nail precisely, sanded the surface until it was smooth, imagining his mother eating there. It outweighed any decision he had made. Software that would have taken. The problem now was how to get that bulky table 20 miles away without Evelyn knowing, and how to put it back together. Robert remembered he had a rusty old work truck that he used only for hauling large trash. He decided it was time to get his hands even dirtier. He loaded it up, with difficulty, and drove full speed toward his mother's apartment. He arrived at the complex. He parked the truck away from Evelyn's window. It was 6 in the afternoon, the sky was getting dark. Robert had to sneak into Evelyn's small backyard. It was humiliating, yes. A man with his money, acting like a thief. But it was part of the penance. With his heart pounding, Robert dismantled the cheap laminate table the apartment offered and put it in a dumpster. And in its place, he put the pine table. He installed it in the small kitchen. Robert sat at it. It smelled of pine, of work. He felt the weight of his own history. He had Savetti's mother with his own hands. Robert cleaned the yard, erasing any evidence of his work, and left. He didn't leave her a note. This wasn't a gift for her to feel obligated to. It was irreparable. When Robert returned home, he was exhausted, covered in sawdust. Sarah was sitting in the living room, staring at the leather chair. For the first time, she didn't look furious, she looked thoughtful. She just said, "Where have you been? Doing more penance?" Robert didn't lie. "I finished the table and brought it to him. I didn't tell him. I didn't thank him." Robert slumped into his father's chair. He felt like the poorest and richest man at the same time. She must be happy," Sarah muttered, without looking at him. Robert closed his eyes. "I don't know if he's happy, Sarah. I just know that I've done something my father would have respected. And I respect myself a little more now." The table and the chair. 2 acts oftener. Robert was about to find out how Evelyn had reacted to his silent gift, and if that act of service would be enough to bring peace. And JC was waiting. It was the morning of December 23 RD. The tense calm in Robert and Sarah's home was louder than any shout. Sarah avoided the living room, making a detour around her father-in-law's ugly but significant leather chair. Robert, however, sat in it to drink his coffee, feeling that the chair was his throne of repentance. I was waiting for the phone to ring, or the doorbell. Around noon, the phone rang. Robert, who was in the garage trying to organize his old tools, ran to answer it. It was Evelyn. His mother's voice wasn't the flat one it had been in recent weeks. It was a little stronger, a little more bewildered. "Robert," Evelyn said, and Robert could hear her slight labored breathing. "What the heck is this table in my kitchen?" Robert felt a pang of panic. What if she hated him? What if it was too much rough? "Mom, is it functional?" he asked foolishly. Evelyn laughed, and Robert realized it was the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her in months. "It's so horrible, Robert. It's crooked, and one leg is about 1/4 of an inch shorter. But it's beautiful. It's pine. It smells like real wood. What did you do with the other one, the laminate?" Robert felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the heating. "I threw it away, Mom. And this one, I made it. With my own hands. I hope it'll be good for Christmas." Evelyn fell silent. A different silence. A silence of comprehension. "No one had ever said so, Robert," he said finally. "Thank you. Really. This is the best Christmas present since your dad built this chair." Robert felt a lump in his throat. The table. The service. The simplicity. He'd spent thousands on expensive gifts that never made her feel loved, and a crooked table $120 made with effort had achieved what money never could. The value is not in the price, but in the offering. They hung up. Robert felt completely exhausted, but clean. He had confessed his sin and done his penance. He entered the room, and there, sitting in the leather chair, was the man in the flannel. JC was waiting. JC didn't say anything about the table. He just pointed at the Christmas tree, the huge, expensive tree that Robert and Sarah had bought and decorated. It was filled with glittering baubles, high-tech LED lights, and perfect tinsel. It was a display of purchased perfection. You have honored the past, Robert, with the chair. And you have served the present with the table, said JC in his deep voice. But the hardest lesson, the one that will make your home again, it's not about the past or the present. It's about the future. Robert sat at his feet, like a student. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. You have a fancy dinner planned here. With the people you impress, continued Jesus. Your mother is 20 miles away, alone, sitting at a table that's about to collapse. Robert felt ashamed again. He had been selfish, even in his repentance. The last lesson is that of sacrifice, said JC. Your marriage is broken because you chose your comfort and your wife's desire over connection. For your marriage to survive, Sarah has to see the value in what you've reclaimed. And you have to put that value before your comfort and your reputation. JC gave him the last task. You have to cancel Christmas Eve dinner here, Robert. Call your wife, tell her dinner's canceled. And then, you have to invite your mother, with the leather chair, over and dine alone together in your kitchen, the kitchen she made her own with her love, before you kicked her out. Robert jumped up. But Jesus, there are 20 guests. The food is bought. Sarah will leave. It's the worst night to do it. JC gave him a compassionate smile. Sacrifice always hurts, Robert. It always involves loss. But the loss of superficial ways leads to the gain of deep. If your wife loves you for who you are, not for what you have, she'll stay. If not, then you'd better know now. You can't build a home on falsehood and shame. JC got up to leave. Take your time, Robert. But time is running out. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. I'll visit you afterward. And the carpenter left as mysteriously as he had arrived. Robert remained in the living room, staring at the tree and the chair. The cancellation of the party and the invitation to his mother. It was the acid test that would determine whether he had learned something, or if he had simply bought a new one, hobby with remorse. December 24th, Christmas Eve. Robert and Sarah's house smelled of expensive pine and half-cooked turkey. The air, however, smelled off-strain. Robert, in his pajamas, sat in front of his laptop. His hand trembled as he typed an email worth more than his bank account. He had to cancel the party. The party that had been planned for weeks, the social event of the season. The email was short and embarrassing. Dear friends, due to an unforeseen, last-minute family emergency, we have to cancel tonight's Christmas Eve dinner. We apologize for the inconvenience. Robert and Sarah. Robert clicked send and felt the weight of 20 glance of disapproval falling upon him. Sarah, who had been packing designer gifts on the kitchen island, noticed the unusual silence. What are you doing up so early? We have to finish our meal. Robert stood up. His pajama shirt was stained with sawdust. That's not necessary anymore, Sarah. I canceled the party. The plate Sarah was holding fell. It crashed to the marble floor with a deafening crash. The silence that followed was even worse. Sarah stood, staring at the mess, and then looked at Robert. What did you just do? His voice wasn't hysterical. It was the voice of someone whose world had just imploded. Robert approached her. I had to do it, Sarah. I can't keep pretending everything's okay. This house is a facade. And I can't honor 20 friends and leave my mother alone. That's what made me kick her out in the first place. My farto the opinion of others. Sarah's reaction wasn't the scream Robert expected. It was an avalanche of pain. This has nothing to do with your mother. This is about me. My reputation. Our lives. Who the hell made you think you can make these decisions without consulting me? Is it your friend Jesus? Your DIY guru? She had guessed it. Robert nodded calmly. Yes. He told me that a home is not a place you buy, but a place you serve. And that you can't love your wife if you don't honor your mother. Sarah, I love you, but I can't build a marriage on shame and lies. Sarah, devastated, ran into the bedroom and slammed the door. Robert felt his marriage shattering. But he didn't give in. He had crossed the bridge of humility. He had completed the act of service. Now, he had to do the final sacrifice. Robert went to the phone and dialed his mother's number. Evelyn answered on the third ring. "Yes, Robert." Robert cleared his throat. "Mom, I know you had plans, but don't celebrate Christmas Eve alone. Can you come? I want you to come and have dinner with me. Just you and me. And bring the leather chair. I want you to have dinner with us. At the kitchen table, if you want." Robert offered his kitchen, the place she had made her own. Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Robert could picture her in her small apartment, by the crooked table. "Are you sure, Robert? What about Sarah? And your friends? I know you have a big party." Evelyn's concern was genuine. She was thinking about him, not her. "The party's cancelled, Mom. Sarah's dealing with it. But this is important. I need you here. I need my house to smell like cornbread again, even if it's just for one night." Evelyn, the wife of 68 years heartbroken, she finally gave in. "Okay, Robert. I'll be there around 7. And don't worry about Sarah. Give her time." Robert hung up. He sat on the floor, his heart racing. He'd risked all his social and emotional capital. His house, once filled with imaginary guests and laughter, was eerily quiet. Suddenly, he heard a noise. Sarah's bedroom door opened. She didn't say a word. She simply walked over to the enormous turkey and pulled it out of the oven with silent fury. Sarah began taking out the food and putting it in plastic containers, with quick, precise movements. Robert approached. "Sarah, please. I'm not asking you to hug her. Just stay. Get to know me and her again. This is the truth about my family." Sarah stopped, the carving knife in her hand. She looked at him, and for the first time, Robert saw not anger, but confusion. "What are we supposed to eat? You and your mom?" Robert smiled sadly. "Whatever. But I want us to eat it in the kitchen. The place where she used to cook." Sarah put the knife on the table. "Good," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But bring that ugly chair from the middle of the living room. I don't want to ruin the kitchen too." Robert knew at that moment that the sacrifice had worked. The house wasn't at peace, but the path to peace was open. Christmas Eve, 7:15 p.m. Robert's house, which should have been resonating with the clinking of champagne glasses and forced laughter, was plunged into a solemn silence. The atmosphere was charged. The large turkey, now solitary, was cooling in the kitchen. Robert had placed 3 plates on the small, neat kitchen table. Sarah was in the living room, lighting the fire, but pointedly ignoring the leather chair. Robert heard the soft thump of a car pulling into the driveway. It was Evelyn's old sedan. Robert felt a knot in his stomach, a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his first big business pitch. He went to the door, and there stood his mother. Evelyn, 68 years old, she was wearing her best dress and a coat. And, yes, Robert smiled, there was his father's leather chair, folded up on the back seat. "Merry Christmas Eve, Robert," Evelyn said, her voice soft. Robert helped her pull out the chair. Together, they carried it into the kitchen and placed it at the head of the table. It was the seat of honor. 3 places. 2 modern designer chairs, and the antique leather chair. The contrast was striking. Evelyn walked into the kitchen, and her breath stopped for a second. The space, which had been hers, was now clean, modern, but still the same space. And there, on the island, was Sarah. Sarah wasn't smiling. She wasn't dressed for dinner. She was wearing a casual sweater. "Hola, Evelyn," Sarah said, her voice as cold as night. There was no hug. There was no courtesy. Robert felt panic. "Sarah stayed," Robert said, his voice too loud, trying to fill the void. "But we cancelled the party." Evelyn nodded, looking at Sarah with compassion, not judgment. "Thank you for staying, Sarah. I know this is your home. And I'm sorry for the inconvenience," Evelyn said. It was an apology. Sarah didn't accept it with words, but with a gesture. She cut a slice of turkey and put it on Evelyn's plate. An act of service excellent. They sat down. Evelyn in her husband's chair. Robert opposite her. Sarah, tense, beside her. The turkey was magnificent, but conversation was minimal. They talked about the weather, the local church, Robert's plans at work. Sure things. Superficial. Robert knew that JC didn't want a quiet dinner, he wanted a connection. Evelyn broke the ice not with words, but with food. "Robert, where's the cornbread? It's not Christmas Eve without cornbread." Robert cringed. "Mom, I didn't do it. I don't know how. Sarah and we don't bake much." Evelyn smiled sadly. "Of course." Sarah, the wife of 34 years who had never baked cornbread in her life, stood up. Robert looked at her in amazement. Sarah went to the pantry and took out a bag of flour. "I will do that," he said, his voice tense. "I always wanted to learn." Evelyn stood up. "I'll teach you, Sarah. It's easy. The trick is not to think about it too much, just feel at the table." And there it was. Robert's Christmas Eve miracle. Sarah and Evelyn, side by side in the gleaming kitchen, kneading flour and telling stories. Evelyn taught Sarah that her father used to use cornmeal instead of regular flour because it was cheaper, back in the 1960s. Sarah laughed. Robert, sitting at the table, watched as his wife and mother found a common ground in the humble act of cooking. When they finally ate the cornbread, a little burnt, but delicious, Sarah turned to Robert. She pointed to her father's chair. "Robert, why did you cancel everything for this? Why the humiliation?" Robert looked into her eyes. "Because when I chose you, I felt like I was saving you, but I was losing myself. And the man who reminded me of that told me that you can't have a future without honoring your past." Evelyn, in the chair, took Robert's hand. "I'm sorry, Robert. I was too invasive. I didn't realize I was taking away your new home." And Sarah, the wife who had demanded the eviction, said the most surprising thing. "No, Evelyn. I refused to share it. And Robert, the chair can stay. If it's your base, then it's ours." Robert felt a release that neither $200,000 per year they could buy. Dinner ended with Robert and Evelyn laughing at how crooked the pine table in Evelyn's apartment was, and Sarah taking a picture of the cornbread. Evelyn left late, leaving her husband's chair there, where it belonged. Robert stayed in the kitchen with Sarah. The marriage was damaged, yes, but the foundation was set. They hugged, a hug of sorry and reality, and Robert went to sleep that night knowing he had gained something infinitely more valuable than financial success. Christmas Day. Robert woke up in his bed, the lingering smell of pine and cornbread in the air. He stretched. His hands were covered in cuts and blisters, but they didn't hurt. It was a different kind of pain, a satisfaction Sarah wasn't in bed. He found her in the kitchen, sitting, drinking coffee. The mess from the previous night had been cleaned up. Sarah was staring at the leather chair. Not with anger, but with a curiosity which was new to Robert. "No," Sarah said without looking at him. "When your mother was teaching me to bake, she told me that your father built this for her so she could sit and read while he was away at war. She didn't want the money. She just wanted the chair because it made her feel connected." Robert realized that Evelyn had opened her heart to Sarah, an act of connection which he had made impossible before. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Lose, lose, lose. Robert smiled. He knew exactly who it was. He went to the door. There she was. JC. The carpenter, with his wooden toolbox. "Merry Christmas, Robert," said. "It looks like the job is almost done." Robert invited JC in. Sarah stayed in the kitchen, curious but cautious. Jesus looked at the living room. There it was, the leather chair in the place of honor. And there was Robert, standing, no longer the proud engineer, but the humble son. JC didn't talk about dinner or Sarah. He focused solely on the lesson. "You did 3 things, Robert. You humbled yourself by asking for the chair, you served by building the table, and you sacrificed yourself by canceling the party." Robert nodded, expecting a congratulation or a new assignment. JC pointed at the chair. "The chair is your past. It reminds you of where you come from. It gives you roots. The table is your present. It reminds you that love is shown with actions, not with checks." And then he pointed to Sarah in the kitchen, who was watching with her heart in her hand. "And the sacrifice, Robert, The one that cost you your pride and your reputation. That's your future. The real problem in your house wasn't your mother or even your wife's decorating, Jesus explained. It was your belief that you could buy your way out of difficult relationships. Money gave you the illusion of control. It made you think you could discard people when they became uncomfortable. JC put a hand on Robert's shoulder. Honor and love, Robert, are like a bridge. You have to build it with humility, maintain it with service, and defend it with sacrifice. That's the only way it can bear the weight of life. JC looked around at the once cold house that was now, though uncomfortable, real. Robert finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the December 20. Jesus, who are you? How did you know so much? JC smiled, that smile that was so warm and familiar. I'm just a carpenter, Robert. And my father taught me that the best way to mend a heart is to show it how. Build something strong. I saw your foundation was broken, and I came to give you the tools you needed. The tools have always been here. You just had to take them. Jesus said goodbye. There was no fanfare, no sermon. Just the simple, straightforward wisdom of a man of the trade. JC grabbed his toolbox and headed for the door. Robert didn't try to stop him. He knew the lesson was over. Robert returned to the kitchen, where Sarah was waiting for him. He went away, she asked. Robert nodded. Who was he, really? Robert shrugged. I don't know, Sarah. I just know that he taught me the most important lesson of my life. Sarah handed Robert a cup of coffee. You know, Robert, I'm going to call Evelyn and invite her to come live with us again. Robert almost dropped his coffee. What? Why? Sarah sighed. Because I realized, last night, that I didn't want you to feel that empty again. I don't want our home to be built on absence. And honestly, Whisper, I need someone to teach me how to make that cornbread properly. Mine was terrible. It was the truth. A human truth, imperfect and real. Robert sat in the kitchen with his wife. Peace didn't come with a flash of lightning, but with his wife's simple decision to invite her mother over. The road back would be difficult, filled with adjustments and compromise, but the foundation stood firm. And the carpenter, Jesus, was gone. December 26th. The emotional hangover from Christmas Eve had passed. Robert and Sarah were in their living room, staring at the leather chair. Robert had called his mother. Evelyn was in shock at Sarah's invitation. Does Sarah want me back, Robert? Really? She asked. Robert assured her it was Sarah's decision. Evelyn agreed, on one condition, I want to pay my share, Robert. And this time, I'm not going to cook unless asked. I'm going to be a guest, not a servant. Robert and Sarah realized that the real work began now. The lesson from Jesus the carpenter had given them the tools, but now they had to use them. The marriage, once filled with tense silences, was now filled with difficult conversations. We have to be very clear about the territory, Sarah said to Robert, sitting on the couch with a notebook. The house eyesore, but Evelyn needs a space that issues, that no one else touches. I don't want her to feel like a guest in her own life. But I also don't want to feel invaded. Robert smiled. It was the first time he'd seen Sarah using her graphic design energy to solve a family problem, rather than imposing their taste. They decided that Evelyn would have the smallest bedroom, which used to be an art studio, and that her private bathroom would be just for her. The limit was physical, and it was necessary. The following discussion was about the money. Robert, the high-income engineer, wanted to pay everything to make up for his guilt. But Sarah intervened. No, Evelyn is right. If you pay for everything, you make her feel powerless. It has to be an honest contribution, Robert. She needs to have dignity. They agreed on a small monthly payment that covered a third of the expenses, based on Evelyn's modest pension. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Robert and Sarah worked together in Evelyn's small bedroom. Robert, using some of the new carpentry skills he had learned, fixed the doorknob, which had always been loose. Sarah bought new sheets and a small reading lamp. Every action was an offering of peace. Robert even did something else. Remembering the twisted table that he had built, went to Mike's warehouse. He bought a basic woodworking kit, one he could use for small projects, and put it in the garage. Away from Robert's clean work area, the engineer created a small area for Robert. The carpenter's apprentice, the service had become a habit, not just a penance. The moment of return came in the December 30th. Robert drove to his mother's apartment. He helped her pack. This time, it wasn't 3 sad boxes, including the crooked pine table Evelyn had insisted on bringing. "It's my table, Robert," she told him with a smile. "I want her here." When they arrived at the house, Sarah was waiting at the door. Not with a forced welcome, but with a genuine openness. Sarah didn't hug Evelyn, but she shook her hand and showed her her new space. "This is your corner, Evelyn. It's just yours. And there's better light to read by." Evelyn, seeing the space so carefully prepared, was moved. But Robert noticed that she didn't say thank you. He simply said, "It's a beautiful place, Sarah. I appreciate it." The difference was subtle. She wasn't being grateful for a favor, but recognized be a family member. That evening, the 3 of them had dinner together in the kitchen. The atmosphere was still a little awkward, but no longer tense. Evelyn asked them about their New Year's plans. Sarah asked Evelyn about her cake recipes. They were conversations between people who were just getting along, knowing again, not from people who were trying to survive living together. Robert looked at his wife, and then at his mother, and then at his father's chair. The foundation of his house had been broken, and the carpenter, Jesus, hadn't shown up with a contract or a sermon. He had shown up with the simple truth that love requires manual labor, honesty, and the courage to sacrifice pride, and that job, Robert knew, would last the rest of their lives. January. The first week. Robert's house was no longer a flawless fortress of modern design. It was a coexistence laboratory. The first few days were, frankly, awkward. Evelyn shut herself in her room. Sarah, who worked in her studio, felt guilty for not spending time with her. And Robert, the engineer software, felt like a full-time mediator. One day, Robert saw Evelyn in the kitchen. She was about to wash the dishes, but stopped. She looked at Robert and asked, "Does Sarah use the dishwasher, or do you prefer to wash them by hand, Robert?" "I don't want to touch anything if she doesn't want to." This time, Evelyn was being respectful off the limits. Robert said to him, "Use the dishwasher, Mom. But you don't have to do the cleaning. We can take turns." Evelyn nodded, relieved that service was no longer an obligation, but an option. Robert realized that the first time, he had taken away her right to choose. Now, he had given it back to her. Evelyn's dignity was her own responsibility. And this is where the lessons of Carpenter J.C. really started to pay off. Robert, instead of spending the night in the garage with his expensive car, started spending time in his little woodworking corner. Not to build another table, but to fix. Robert took a small wooden chest that Evelyn had mentioned was broken, a memento of her father. Instead of paying someone $50 to fix it, Robert used the hammer and gouges that J.C. had shown him. It took 3 nights. Each night, the act of service, it felt less like penance and more like a meditation. Sarah, for her part, was forced to humiliate oneself in her own way. She tried baking Evelyn's cornbread again, but failed miserably. The bread came out rock hard. Instead of hiding it, as she would have done before, Sarah went to Evelyn's room. "Evelyn," Sarah said to him, her face red, "I need your help. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It tastes awful." Evelyn smiled. "Come on, darling. The secret isn't just the recipe, it's the patience. And the feeling." The 2 women spent the afternoon cooking together. Evelyn wasn't judging, she was guiding. And Sarah was serving her mother-in-law through learning. Robert watched from the kitchen doorway. His wife, the successful designer, was there, flower on her nose, laughing with her mother. The bridge was being used. One afternoon, Robert came home. Sarah was waiting for him, not angry, but excited. "Robert, guess what? Evelyn showed me some old photos of her childhood home. She told me how your father courted her in 1975. She's so different when you let her talk about herself." Robert sat next to his father's chair. He realized that his biggest mistake wasn't just kicking Evelyn out. It was stopped listening to her. He had assumed he knew who his mother was. But the real sacrifice, it wasn't just economic, it was the sacrifice of his own presumption. Robert and Sarah's marriage changed fundamentally. It was no longer about who controlled the space or the money. Now it was about who could serve better to the other. If Robert was having a rough day, Sarah didn't buy him a gift. She gave him an hour of silence in her study. If Sarah was stressed, Evelyn didn't interfere, but left a silent note: "There's freshly baked cornbread for when you have time." Robert, the man who once measured success by his net worth, now I measured it by the peace in his home. And that peace didn't come cheap. It had cost the cancellation of a party, the anger of his wife, and the pride of an engineer. But it was worth every splinter, every nail, and every word off Modestithat he had uttered. The carpenter, Jesus, had taught him to build a life, not just to pay for it. Several months passed. February, then March. Life didn't get perfect, not in the suburbs, not anywhere. But it did get better. He turned around authentic Robert, and Sarah's marriage was stronger, not because they fought less, but because now they fought honestly, with the aim of understood rather gain. Evelyn had adapted to her new role as a resident with dignity. She dedicated herself to her projects. Reading, church, and yes, cooking, but only when asked. And that small gesture of asking was the bridge Robert and Sarah needed. "Mom, will you teach us how to make that apple pie?" It was the new way of service of Sarah. The community, the same friends whose Christmas Eve party Robert had canceled, began to notice the change. One evening, a couple approached Robert at a party. "Robert, we're sorry to hear about your family emergency at Christmas. Is everything okay with your mom? We heard she's back home." Robert wasn't embarrassed. He shrugged and smiled. "Yes, it's here. And the family emergency was that I was an idiot, and Jesus, a carpenter I knew, helped me fix it. The emergency is over." The couple was speechless. Robert, the man who once only spoke of factions off the bag, now he spoke of modesty. The leather chair remained in the room. It was a magnet for conversation. People asked about it. Sarah, the designer who had hated it, was now the one telling the story, with a mixture of humor and pride. "Yes, it's hideous. But it's our foundation. My husband reminded me that elegance is worthless without roots." Robert, for his part, continued to go to his carpentry corner in the garage. He not only repaired things around the house, but also began making small gifts: a spice rack for Evelyn, a pine picture frame for Sarah. Manual labor had become the language of his love. One Saturday morning, Robert took Evelyn to his small apartment. The owner had rented it out again. Robert handed her the keys. "I want you to know that you are free, Mom. You don't have to be here. But if you stay, it's because want, not because a veto do it. And you'll always have your own money and your own door." Evelyn thanked him, but Robert knew she wouldn't leave. She had found her place again. But this time, the place wasn't just a bedroom. It was a seat at the heart of the family, earned by the sacrifice of his son and the humility of his daughter-in-law. And the most beautiful thing of all, Robert and Sarah started talking about having children. One night, Sarah said to him, "You know, I want our children to grow up with your mother here. I want them to see their grandmother in your father's chair. I want them to have strong roots." Robert smiled. He had lost perspective, he had thrown out his mother, he had almost lost his wife. And it was all because of the fear of losing his control of his life. The carpenter, Jesus, had taught him that control is an illusion, but connection it's real. The last thing Robert did was call Mike, the owner of the store. He bought a small piece of wood from him, which he used to make a small ornament that hung near the front door. It was the family initial. It wasn't elegant. But Robert made it with his own hands. It was a silent reminder: this house is built on work. And that's the key to this story, folks. It's not a Christmas fairy tale. It's a hard work. Robert had to dismantle his pride and build his home from scratch, plank by plank, with humility, service, and sacrifice. And only then, the engineer of software learned the most important lesson in life. Time, my friends, is the true carpenter. It does not build houses. Butcher actor Robert, the engineer who once looked only to the future and his heritage, now looked to the past and his foundation point. 1 year later on Christmas Eve, Robert invited me to his house. And the change was tangible. The house was still elegant, yes, but it was no longer a sign museum. There were signs of life, of history. In the living room, her father's leather chair was worn from use. Evelyn sat in it to read. Sarah sometimes used it to drink coffee. Connection, it had become a routine, and routines become roots. In the kitchen, Robert and Sarah showed me something. They had replaced the modern kitchen table with a large, sturdy pine table. Robert hadn't made it, no. This time, they had built together in his little carpentry corner. It was polished, but the handiwork was still visible. Tea was the fruit of service. Sarah, who once despised cornbread, offered it to me. It was perfect. And she told me, with Evelyn at her side, how important it was to her that her mother-in-law teach her family recipes. I learned that their story is my story, Sarah told me. And only when I accepted it, my home finally felt tight. And Robert, the man who threw his mother out of fear, gave me the final lesson. The mistake I made, he told me, while looking at his wife and mother, it was believing that love and honor came without a cost, that I could pay to avoid sacrifice. Robert had learned that true success is not accumulation, but restoration. Robert and Sarah are expecting their first child. Evelyn, of course, is delighted. Robert is already planning how he's going to carve the baby's name into a small piece of pine. It's no longer a penance, but act of love. I never saw the carpenter, Jesus, again. Neither did Robert. But honestly, does it matter who he was? He came when the foundation was broken, gave Robert 3 simple tools: humility, service, and sacrifice, and then he was gone. The lesson came not from an engineering book or a financial advisor, but from a man who understood the value of manual labor and human connections. Love, family, a home. These are not things you can buy with money or design with strict rules. These are things you must build every day. And that construction hurts, it gives you blisters, it makes you feel ashamed. But it's the only job that's truly worth it. It's the carpenter's job. So the next time you find yourself in a conflict, or feel like your life, no matter how successful, is cold and empty, remember Robert's story. Remember the chair, the crooked table, and the canceled Christmas Eve dinner. Ask yourself, what part of my foundation is broken, and what do I have to build with my own hands to fix it? Because the world is full of successful Roberts who have confused Thepris with enviable, and sometimes, the deepest lesson comes from a source you don't expect, with an old toolbox, and the simple truth that the road back to honor always begins with modesty. And that's where the story of Robert, Sarah, and Evelyn ends. Not with a wedding, but with a reconciliation daily. The engineer finally understood that the most important thing in his life was not the code, but the connection, and that is the lesson that Jesus, the carpenter, taught him. And you? Which is your leather chair? Which is the bassethat you have left in the attic or thrown out of your life out of fear or pride? This is Robert's story, but the lesson is for all of us. Honor, his service, his sacrifice, are not just words. They are the tools that we need to build a life that is truly worth living. Now, I want to hear from you. What did this story teach you? Have you ever had to build your own bridge? Modesty? Leave me a comment below. Tell me what part of the lesson impacted you the most and what foundation you are determined to repair in your own life. If this story has touched your heart or reminded you of the value of your own family, please subscribe to our channel. Don't miss our next series, where we'll continue exploring true stories of redemption and connection. Dale Likito this video and share it with someone who needs a little of the carpenter's wisdom. Remember, the work at home is never done, but it's the most important work you'll ever do. See you in the comments.